Kara Millen's world unraveled in a single stormy night as flashing police lights flooded her quiet street, while 8-year-old Liam watched in frozen silence as his mother's desperate fight turned their home into a scene of chaos. The rain had started early in the evening, a slow drizzle that became a steady downpour by nightfall, turning the quiet suburban street into a glistening ribbon under the streetlights. Houses sat dark and still, their windows glowing faintly with the soft light of television screens, until the sudden flash of blue lights broke the calm. Police cars pulled up one after another, tires hissing against the wet pavement, their headlights slicing through the darkness. Neighbors stirred behind curtains and blinds, the hum of engines and the crackle of police radios drawing them from their living rooms. It was unusual for anything to disturb this part of town. Children were usually asleep by now, parents winding down for the night. Instead, an air of unease spread across the street like the rainwater pooling in the gutters. Inside the small brick house at the center of the commotion, 32-year-old Kara Millen paced from wall to wall of the living room. Her bare feet left damp marks on the carpet where she had stepped out of the rain to retrieve the mail. The letter that had set everything in motion lay crumpled on the coffee table, its ink smudged from her trembling hands. Across the room, her 8-year-old son Liam sat stiffly on the couch, a stuffed bear clutched tightly against his chest. His wide eyes followed his mother as she moved, but he said nothing. The storm outside seemed to echo the one building inside the house. The knocking came first, sharp, deliberate strikes against the front door that made Liam jump. Kara froze mid-step, her breath catching as she glanced toward the sound. Another round of knocks followed, louder this time, accompanied by voices calling out. The words were muffled by the rain, but the tone was unmistakable, authoritative, demanding. Kara's heartbeat quickened. She moved to the window, careful to stay out of sight, and peered through a small gap in the curtain. Flashing blue lights reflected off the slick pavement and across her pale face. Police officers stood on her porch, their raincoats glistening under the street lamp. Neighbors watched from the shadows of their own homes, whispers traveling from house to house as curiosity and worry mixed in the damp night air. Inside, Liam's grip tightened on his bear. Kara stepped back from the window, her chest rising and falling in uneven bursts. The voices outside called again, firmer this time. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with something unspoken, as if the house itself sensed that the quiet life inside was about to fracture. Earlier that same day, the signs of trouble had already begun to surface, though no one in the neighborhood could have guessed how the night would unfold. Morning light had filtered through thin curtains as Kara sat at the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee untouched beside her. The house was quiet except for the ticking of an old clock and the occasional creak of floorboards settling. A small stack of unopened envelopes lay before her, each one carrying the weight of deadlines she could no longer meet. Bills, late notices, and final warnings, every letter a reminder of how quickly stability had slipped from her grasp. When she finally tore open the newest envelope, the words inside struck like a blow. The bank had issued a final demand: pay the overdue mortgage within days or face immediate foreclosure. The message rattled through her like a storm. Kara had already lost her job months earlier after the store where she worked closed without warning. Since then, she had scraped by on temporary gigs and small savings, but the money had dwindled faster than she expected. She thought about her ex-husband, the custody hearings, and the endless arguments over who could provide a better life for Liam. The pressure built until it felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. As the hours passed, her unease sharpened into agitation. She moved from room to room, rearranging objects without purpose, her thoughts running in frantic circles. Outside, the neighborhood bustled with ordinary life: children riding bicycles, the distant bark of a dog, neighbors trimming hedges, but Kara felt cut off from it all, as though a glass wall separated her from everyone else. At one point she stepped outside to the mailbox, hoping for a distraction, but returned with nothing but damp hair and more worries. Neighbors later recalled seeing her pace the front yard with a distant look, muttering words they couldn't quite make out. One person heard a crash from inside the house late in the afternoon, a sound like a chair tipping over or a heavy object striking the floor. No one knew what had fallen or why. Liam, quiet and observant, sensed the tension even if he didn't understand it. He stayed close, following his mother's movements with watchful eyes. By evening, the rain began, a steady drizzle that masked the growing sense of unrest inside the house. Kara's thoughts looped endlessly: fear of losing her home, fear of losing her son. The unopened letters still lay scattered across the table, silent witnesses to the unraveling that was about to reach its breaking point. The rain intensified as night settled fully over the neighborhood, a rhythmic drumming against the roof that seemed to echo the pounding of Kara's heart. The knocking at the door came again, sharper and more insistent, each strike rattling the thin wood and sending a tremor through the living room. Liam flinched at every sound, his small frame stiff with fear. The stuffed bear he held was damp from the sweat of his palms. Kara stood motionless for a moment, the muscles in her face tight as she listened. The voices outside grew clearer now, firm but calm, identifying themselves as police officers and asking her to open the door. Their words were muffled by the storm but carried the unmistakable tone of authority. She stepped back from the entryway, her mind racing. Every nerve in her body urged her to stay still, to keep the door locked, to keep them out. She imagined the letter on the table, the bills upstairs, the threat of losing Liam. To her, the officers were not simply visitors. They were the embodiment of everything she feared, control slipping away, decisions made without her. Minutes dragged. Another round of pounding followed, louder this time, and the voices sharpened. Kara's breath came in short bursts. She turned toward Liam, who hadn't moved from the couch. His wide eyes followed her as she paced in small, frantic circles, her bare feet silent on the carpet. The room felt smaller by the second, the walls closing in as the sound of rain and voices fused into a single, relentless hum. Suddenly, the front door shuddered under a heavy strike. The frame groaned. Kara froze, then bolted toward the hallway, grabbing anything within reach. A book, a picture frame, a small lamp. She clutched them as though they might shield her from what was coming. With a final loud crack, the door swung open and the first officer stepped inside, his flashlight cutting a bright path across the dark room. Chaos erupted. Kara hurled the lamp with startling force, the crash of breaking glass drowned only by the storm outside. Papers and books flew as she flung anything her hands found. The officers ducked and shouted commands, but she moved with frantic energy, driven by panic rather than strength. Liam remained frozen on the couch, his eyes wide and unblinking, a silent witness to the sudden violence transforming their home into a scene of turmoil. Rainwater pooled across the entryway floor as more officers stepped inside, their heavy boots leaving dark prints on the carpet. The air smelled of damp fabric and the sharp tang of broken glass. Kara stood near the hallway, chest heaving, hair plastered to her forehead. The scattered objects she had thrown lay across the room, shattered lamp pieces, overturned books, a picture frame cracked down the middle. Liam stayed fixed on the couch, his small shoulders drawn tight, his bare pressed so hard against him it seemed to disappear beneath his grip. One officer, taller than the rest, moved forward with slow, deliberate steps, speaking in a steady tone that carried over the pounding rain. His words were meant to calm, but they only seemed to push Kara further into panic. She darted toward the kitchen, bare feet, sliding slightly on the wet floor. The officers followed, their radios crackling with clipped updates. The metallic scrape of a drawer opening echoed through the house. For a tense heartbeat, everyone expected the worst. Hands hovered near holsters, breath held as Kara rifled through the drawer. Instead of a weapon, she pulled out a stack of photographs, old snapshots of birthdays, park outings, and quiet mornings, frozen fragments of a life she feared was slipping away. She clutched them to her chest, her knuckles whitening around the edges. Her knees buckled, the strength that had fueled her frantic resistance draining in an instant. She sank to the floor, sobs shaking her thin frame. The photographs scattered slightly as she rocked forward, tears streaking her face. The officers hesitated, the tension in the room softening just enough for movement. One approached slowly, hand out but not reaching, and knelt beside her. Another motioned for Liam to stay where he was, his wide eyes reflecting the flashes of blue and red lights that spilled through the open doorway. Kara's cries grew quieter, her shoulders slumping as if the fight had finally burned itself out. The officers eased her arms behind her back and secured the handcuffs with a practiced efficiency, the click of metal almost gentle compared to the chaos before. Liam slid off the couch without a word, padding across the carpet to retrieve the scattered photographs. He held them carefully, edges trembling, in his small hands, as the storm outside continued its relentless beat against the house that now felt emptier than it had moments before. By the time the flashing lights began to fade, the neighborhood had fallen into a heavy silence, broken only by the steady hiss of rain. Word of the disturbance spread quickly from one house to another, neighbors whispering at their windows as the police escorted Kara into the waiting car. Her face was pale under the street lamp, streaked with dried tears and rainwater. Liam stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket a kind officer had brought, his eyes fixed on the retreating vehicle. He held the photographs against his chest the same way his mother had moments earlier, as though they were a shield against everything that was changing around him. Inside the house, the evidence of the night's chaos remained scattered, shards of glass glinting in the low light, damp footprints leading from room to room, papers strewn like fallen leaves. A social worker arrived quietly, a woman with a soft voice, who guided Liam inside to gather a few belongings. She asked gentle questions, but Liam barely responded, his focus still on the driveway where the taillights of the patrol car disappeared into the darkness. Investigators combed through the home over the following days, uncovering a trail of unpaid bills, eviction notices, and court papers from an ongoing custody battle. There were no signs of drugs, no hidden bottles of alcohol, no weapons, only stacks of paperwork and the unmistakable imprint of relentless pressure. Neighbors admitted later that they had noticed Kara's growing strain, the distant stare, the pacing, the small outbursts of frustration when she thought no one was watching. Yet none had guessed how close she was to breaking. The court hearings that followed were tense but merciful. Reports from counselors described Kara as overwhelmed rather than violent, a parent driven to desperation by fear of losing her child and her home. Instead of a long jail sentence, the judge ordered counseling, financial management classes, and regular check-ins. Liam was placed with relatives while the process unfolded, visiting his mother only under supervision until she could prove her stability. Months later, the house remained standing but quieter, a place where rain still whispered across the roof and neighbors still remembered the night of flashing lights. Some spoke of it as a cautionary tale about hidden struggles, a reminder that the calmest streets can hide storms no one sees coming. For Liam, the memory stayed sharp and unyielding, the echo of pounding rain, the cold glow of police lights, and the sight of his mother cradling photographs as if they were the last pieces of their life she could hold on to.